Hi, everyone. My name is Finn Lockwood, they, them. I am the trans program curator at New Haven Pride Center, and I am so excited for today. We are doing our What is Queer Art conversation, and this is actually one of the first panels that I was on at the New Haven Pride Center before I worked here, so very near and dear to my heart, and I am excited to talk to all of our wonderful artists today. Before we begin, I'd like to do a quick land acknowledgement and take a moment to acknowledge the land on which we are hosting this event. The New Haven Pride Center was founded on and operates on the traditional lands of the Mohegan, Mashantucket Pequot, Eastern Pequot, Schaghticoke, Golden Hill Paugussett, Niantic, and Quinnipiac peoples. Please take a moment to acknowledge and honor the Native people whose lands you occupy and the history of the place you are in. You can learn more about that at native-land.ca. And now I'm going to introduce our guests today. It's my pleasure to introduce to you. We have Ricky Mestre, Hope Chávez, Anne Gogh, and Miss Frank. Hi, everyone.
Hi.
Hello.
Thanks so much for joining us today on this lovely afternoon. Happy Pride to everyone.
Happy Pride to you.
I'm so excited to be talking to a screen full of artists today and try to answer the question that I think has no real answer. What is queer art? So I think I just want to kind of start and we'll introduce ourselves a little bit and maybe talk a little bit about what our art is and what we do. So my name is Finn, and I do a lot of different art. I'm a tattoo artist. I am a traditional artist. I'm a crafter. A big part of what I do too is also connecting with other artists. So that's kind of my thing. So Ricky, did you want to go next? We'll just kind of go around the room.
Why not? My name is Ricky. I guess I kind of term myself as a visual artist because I like to get involved with a lot of different types of art. I do a lot of painting, mostly figurative work, but I also do video kind of arts and also theatrical kind of things. So it's just kind of all of them. I try to get involved with everything.
Nice. Hope.
Hi, y'all. So I'm a theater producer by trade. That's what I've done my whole career. But certainly that has given me the opportunity to explore other kinds of projects, especially during the pandemic. I was producing a lot of virtual work, dipping my toe into the world of film as well. And I am coming to acceptance around my crafting, my writing. I am now calling those things my art as well. Those are my budding art practices.
Excellent. Miss Frank?
Well, as I get older, as I wake up every morning and realize I'm still alive, and I celebrate that, I believe for me, my art is sort of a daily expression of self, more often than anything else. I do work as a theater professor at American International College in Springfield, Massachusetts. I think it's important as theater artists that we offer the opportunity for other folks to pick up the baton whenever we choose to put that down and work with us collaboratively. I'm also a singer and a drag artist and play with gender, both in my performance art, but also in my daily life and identity. So.
Excellent. And Anne?
Hello. So I'm a visual performing healing artist. I just love art all around. Like painting is like my go-to, but I love music. I make music. I'm currently working on making beats, and it's just like a whole nother world that I just can't wait to be super proficient in that. And I just love art and bringing people together and just connecting the community. It's important to have spaces that's for us,
That's awesome. Yeah, I think art is it's kind of like food. It's one of those great unifiers. You know, it's something like every person can connect to in some way, you know? I think the first question I'd like to ask is just kind of like, in terms of your own work, whatever you do, whatever your art or your craft is, how do you put your queerness or your identity into your artwork? Or do you? Is that something that you feel is important to include? And how do you do it? We can start with whoever.
I'll start. Well, actually, with my story, originally I wasn't doing a lot of queer art because I'm Puerto Rican, so they always had me involved in like in Hispanic month kind of exhibitions and things like that. So it seemed like they wanted to see more, you know, my Puerto Rican cultural side in my work. And, you know, there was definitely a lot of like, you know, Latin references to some of my pieces, as well as like the urban surroundings that I grew up with, which, you know, at the time there were a lot of, you know, Hispanics around that area. And so it was kind of like, you know, slowly I started kind of progressing into, you know, sliding in, you know, queer components into it, but keeping it kind of subtle because part of me wasn't quite out to the world, you know what I mean? So it was kind of like, let me just leave little hints, and if you pick up on it, then maybe you'll get an extra component of this artist aside from, well, he's Puerto Rican and that's why he's in this show, you know? It wasn't until how do you say, there was one exhibit that I was part of, it was called Identity, and you know, I was talking to the curator about, you know, what is it that you want to see? He was just like, well, it's your identity. And I said, is this another Puerto Rican show or Hispanic show? He was like, no. And he was kind of the one that put it in my head, like, there's other parts to your identity besides being Puerto Rican, you know? And I was just like, it kind of like a light bulb went off at that. I was like, oh, I can, you know, incorporate this into my art because, yeah, especially for this particular show, because that's part of, you know, also who I am. You know, maybe I'm, you know, Puerto Rican, but, you know, then I started to think about all these other components to what makes up this person, you know. So then I felt a little bit more freer to, you know, kind of share that in my art. And I forgot where I was going with this, but
I think that's like it's such a strong example of how an artist gets pigeonholed, you know? Like they, like the community or whoever you're sharing your art with picks, like hones in on one thing, and they're like, just keep doing this, keep doing this. But I think something interesting about what you said is that like that queerness was there, whether or not you even knew about it in yourself, like it's there, it's inherently there. And I think that, like, for me, that's what queer art is. It's like, whether or not you define it as such, if you, the creator, you're queer, there's something in there that's gonna, you know.
Yeah, there was a lot of things that I used to do that a friend of mine used to joke and he'd say, Rick, you're the stuff that you do is like gay but not gay. So it was always kind of questionable, like depending on the viewer, however you wanted to, you know, look at it, then, you know, then you can see it or you don't see it. So that's kind of, you know, what it was for a little while.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I agree. I kind of like relate strongly with you, Ricky, because like I'm Jamaican, and growing up being gay, that's pretty much unheard of. So like in creating in the beginning, like I didn't even think about having that type of like imagery because it just was no space, and like wanting to fit in, wanting to belong, wanting to be loved, right? Like, and not wanting to upset my family and things of that nature. And I realized by like 10th grade, like, oh man, that's just throw that out the window, you know? And I think, like what you said, Finn, when you make art and you're queer, it's kind of going to be in there no matter what. And so, I don't know, it's a funny thing. It's like the chicken and the egg, really, in a way. Seriously, it just, what is it? What comes first? What comes second? Is it even linear? I don't know. You know?
I mean, it's funny because in my position, I'm often like an advocate / a facilitator, right? When you think about what producers really do, I certainly would never imbue a piece of work that I'm producing with something that isn't already inherently there from the creators. and often I'm facilitating people facilitating them through their own art making process, and facilitating them in ensuring that whatever it is they're trying to get across lands with the audience, lands with all the components. As the producer, I am liaising with marketing, I am liaising with development, I am liaising with all these different folks who are going to interact with the piece and with the artists themselves. So it's interesting to think about, like, I certainly, in those spaces, as opposed to my spaces when I am creating something, I may not be in a position to bring queerness to it. However, Joey Reyes, one of my producing friends who's over at the Longworth Theater, we used to have all these conversations about how, as producers, and as queer folks particularly, and myself being someone who's queer in like that expansive sense of the word, right, who doesn't seem to fit in a binary in terms of like who I'm romantically attracted to and all that, we would talk a lot about how, like, as queer folks, we can see different kinds of solutions. We can see things on a spectrum in a different way. It feels sort of innate to us in how we would process. And we would talk about, when we talk with cis folks or with straight folks, that often, like, that worldview and the way of thinking about things is just still very binary in many ways. And so even if the art is not explicitly queer, though I'm always advocating for queer art and always trying to bring my lived experience to ensuring cultural competency around queer things and queer culture in the theatrical spaces I'm in, I also feel like I'm able to bring, like, a different way of looking at problems and a different way of looking at people and situations that leaves room for the gray, that leaves room for holding multiple truths at the same time. That's how I feel like queerness shows up for me a lot as a producer.
That's awesome.
As a theater artist, I'm trained to work with other people. I mean, it's a collaborative, it's a collaborative art. And yet, for maybe the last, 5 or 6 years of my life and my work, I'm doing a lot of auto performance, writing a lot of auto performance, performing a lot of auto performance about my life as a young person, and my family's interaction with me and my community's interaction with me, growing up in an Italian and Spanish sort of shared community space. Because I think as I get older, I recognize how important it is that representation matters, and that my story matters, and the stories of others do too, but I know that I can speak inherently to mine in a way that no one else can, and the same for others. And so I'm excited by the collaborative work that I may do with a designer or a director that sees my work and helps me shape that, because we have to tell our stories. If not, it is rare that others will do it for us and do it justice.
That's right. Yes, definitely. I think that, I watched, I know I talked about this in another panel I did last week, but I am so into this. I don't know if anyone else has watched Disclosure on Netflix yet. It is, it's a documentary with Laverne Cox, and it goes through trans representation in media throughout the years. And I think it goes back to like as early as like maybe like the late 1800s in some aspects. And it's fascinating. It's horrifying in a lot of ways, but it's also really fascinating because a lot of the representation that, from back in those time periods that still exists is mostly negative, because a lot of the artwork created by us, our community, our people, it's been destroyed. So I think that's why it's so important for us to keep creating as queer artists, because it's like part of our history too. It's not just a fun hobby or a job or a passion for us. It's like literally history too. So it's nice that it exists.
Mm-hmm.
My next question is, in terms of artwork, can artwork be queer without it being created by a queer person? And if, depending on your answer, can you give an example, maybe something that you think is now queer because of people who have taken it?
I think for me, it's about who wants to tell somebody's story and why, right? So if I'm telling my own story, fine. But if someone else wants to tell my story, and for example, they may not share my identity or they do not identify as queer, I want to know why they're the one to tell my story. And if there is value in that reason, for me, I think that there is value in the work. If it is to commercialize it or to somehow make money off of it or capitalize upon it in some way, I think obviously that's not something I'm interested in. Because there are certainly those out there that want to do that.
Oh, for sure.
Indeed. But for me, I think it's important to have that conversation. Why do you want to tell the story of me or folks like me? And in that way, I think the dialogue is important.
I actually have two examples. It's sit on different ends of the spectrum. So I was part of a process with an artist who identifies as queer but as cis, also as a person of color, who was writing a play about trans youth, and their reason for doing it was actually really strong, right? They were like, there are not enough trans youth stories. There's not enough of watching how the family dynamics of a person transitioning, evolves, etc. Really altruistic in my mind. Best of intentions. However, throughout the process of receiving notes from trans artists that were paid to give feedback on the writing and the way the story was unfolding, demonstrated some real fragility around that, really got defensive and then very argumentative about whether or not they had a right. And then, started to lean into that classic conversation of, am I being censored now? Am I being told I can't write something? And I wish I could remember who said this. I wish I could attribute it to them, but somewhere I was in a space with other theater artists, and this person said, if you're writing characters that are of identities that are different than you, where that's not the whole story, the story isn't about their identity. It's like, oh, this is a disabled character, this is a trans character, this is a non, etc. Cool. But if it is a story about their lived identity and you don't share that lived identity, then you need to be in partnership or you need to not take up that space. And the second example, because as I was thinking about this question, what is queer art? I think it depends on the context for me about what we're saying. Are you saying this is a queer exhibit? This is a queer showcase, in which case I want to see all work by queer people for sure. Or are you saying do I call my art queer, which some of it is, and I think some of it is not, and that's good, actually. I don't want to just be a queer producer. I am a producer of all kinds of things, not just things that seem visibly queer. My capacity and range are bigger than that. And so my second example is a show that actually, I'm now at the Oregon Shakespeare Festival, and we're known for doing lots of adaptations and new takes on classic works. And I can't say the name of the play yet because it's not been announced, but we're doing an adaptation of a classic story that is not queer. However, the director chosen for it is queer, and he very much wants to queer the story. So he wants to bring his lived experience and build a creative team that is queer. And I would still call that queer art, even though the story was never written about a queer person. He just wants to see what happens if we change one of these characters to be queer, and because he believes the subtext is there. So I think there's a lot of yes and answers to that question, Finn.
Absolutely.
So, I've been doing the Bridgeport Pride art exhibit. We're going on our 13th year now. And we've always kind of left it open for, pretty much anybody to participate, as far as exhibiting in the gallery. And we specifically left it open because, maybe, you don't have to be a queer artist to make some kind of work that was inspired by, somebody in the community. We've had one guy who, he was an artist, but, when he submitted work, his son had just come out, like, that year. So he made some pieces based on what was going on during the time that his son came out to him, So there's always have to be like some kind of connection to it. Like if you paint, trees, then it's like, okay, well, you're not queer and you're painting something that has nothing to do with the culture, then, we won't hang that up. But, it's always been like, let's look at the content of the piece as well, and, for the most part, we try to keep the content of the artwork in the show. Like, is there something about what is made in this piece that connects with somebody who can, like, identify with it somehow in the queer community, and that's, maybe that's not the right way. That's the wrong way is just kind of what we were doing because, we wanted to leave it open for everybody because we do have a lot of allies and we do want, them to feel like they can engage in something with us, especially with art. So I for our exhibit, it's essentially a queer art exhibit. So it's kind of like, well, we want the content to feel queer, whether or not you're a queer artist, because there's obviously a reason why you do certain things, and you made these pieces, you were influenced by somebody. There was another woman that I know that she paints all these, pictures of like portraits of her brother. I think he died of AIDS years ago, and she still like, makes images of him, So it's like, she's not a queer artist, but she's definitely, feels like she shares like some connection with us, through her brother. So, when especially if you understand the story, or if there's something that, is queerish about the piece, then I think that makes for queer art, whether or not the artist himself or herself or themselves are queer, And then the other thing I was thinking is that, sometimes something could have been farthest from, any queer subject matter, but as a queer person, you may look at it and get something completely different out of that piece,
Mm-hmm.
And because of your own perception of it, you made it a queer piece because it means something to you in a way that wasn't intended for, but now for that person, it's like, it has a different meaning to it. And I think that's kind of the beauty of art. It's up to who's looking at it and what they get out of it. It might not even be what the artist intended, but if you get something out of it that's different than what it was supposed to be, then, then that's like a bonus for the artist, because it's like, now this has so many other meanings to it than what you initially had intended it on being.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think I so agree with you, Ricky. And I think that's the quote by Martha Graham. What the audience thinks of you is none of your business.
Yeah.
Right? That you do your work, and whatever someone takes of it from it is theirs, and they can share it back with you or not. But I really appreciate that.
Yeah, I think it's always this great dance between the content and the creator and then the audience. Like, you never know how somebody's going to take something, and it's kind of like a medicine with the unlabeled use. Like, you didn't know you could use it for this, and now look, wow. And now, like, the queer community is like adapting to it, and we love it, and we're just whatever. And then you made it just because you just wanted to make it. Like, there's many times I just paint something because I wanted to paint it, but because I'm queer, it's like queer by default, right? But it has nothing to do with anything. It's like the trees you mentioned earlier. It's such a dance. It's such a dance. But I think it's important. It's like how the thing is being depicted. Like, is it in a derogatory light? You know what I mean? Like, and do we want that? Like, what's important? So, yeah.
Definitely. I think about, I recently read, has anyone seen the movie The Danish Girl?
No.
Yes, we got a couple nods here. So for anyone who isn't familiar with The Danish Girl, it is a movie. I'm not sure when it came out, but it's a story depicting, or a movie depicting the story of the first trans woman, or believed to be one of the first trans women to medically transition. and it was the person who played the role of the trans woman was a cis man, Eddie Redmayne, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
Am I getting that right? And this kind of ties into like some of the stuff we were talking about earlier, but especially when you were talking, Hope, about the person getting kind of defensive about what they were doing and the idea of censorship. When the movie first came out, of course, you know, it was kind of a hot topic in the trans community because people were questioning, why didn't you cast a trans person to play this role, you know? And, you know, whether or not what you think, I personally think it was a beautiful movie. I personally think they should have definitely cast a trans woman. It was a beautiful movie, but the way that Eddie Redmayne took the critique at first was very like defensive, and you know that immediately just kind of made me be like, regardless of how beautifully you played this role, you are not representing us, you know, this is not queer art. And recently I read an article or an interview with him where he would just flat out said, I regret playing that role completely. So I'm glad that there was some learning on his end at least. But you know, it, like you said, Anne, I feel like that dance you were talking about, that's exactly it. It's such a, you know, because I know trans people that were totally touched by that movie and thought that he did a beautiful job. And, you know, I think of things like Harry Potter, for instance, you know, and how you were talking, Ricky, about how people just take, you know, things and make them queer just because they like them or something like that. And I think that, you know, regardless of how transphobic J.K. Rowling is, a lot of people find queer identities and queer stories within Harry Potter, and you know they hold on to that and reject the artist, the creator who made it, and kind of take it on their own, you know. So I feel like there's like reclamation sometimes with that kind of thing.
Well, I think what is interesting is we're having a like couple of simultaneous conversations here. Like one is like, what is queer culture? Because some things get claimed into queer culture that, as you said, Miss Frank, like we're never today, right? Dolly Parton, Devil Wears Prada, right? These are things that we're like, yes queer icons. Lady Gaga, although I think she has described herself as queer at this point, but like, you know, like things that are like we pull them in because of what we see, because it validates something in us, even if it wasn't about us, or it sees something within us that we didn't like have for ourselves. And then we're also talking about this like personal impact piece of it too, right? Like, so the personal impact may be so different for everyone. The personal impact of seeing the Danish Girl could cause real harm for an individual or real frustration because it's tied to all these other systems, right? It's less, in my opinion, to do with whether or not Reddy should have played that part. And it's more about like the systems that have kept trans people out of leading performance roles, the capitalist systems that keep them from accessing the same education, the same income, right? Like it's more about the systems level piece than whether or not the isolated incident of Eddie playing this character. And so it's like, how do we take accountability? How do we ask people to take accountability if they are going to knowingly make a choice like that? Like how are they going to own that that may also cause harm, deep harm to some folks, and may really trigger some wounds?
I also think that it's, you know, from the perspective of the theater artist, I think it's very difficult because waiting for, you know, a Lort D regional theater to produce an entire season of completely queer written, directed, designed, performed pieces of work around, you'll be waiting for the rest of your life. Because they don't see that as being commercially viable. They don't see that as being maybe even artistically a conversation that their patron base can handle. And so that's why I think it's so important that queer artists in general, queer performance artists, visual artists, recognize that their home, their car, their place of work, their open community center, the street, the park is their Lort D theater stage, in a sense, is their gallery. Because if we wait for the opportunity, it may never come. And so that takes a lot of bravery. It takes a lot of guts because it's scary. At least it is for me, to put myself out there. But I think to recognize that, oh, there's this affirming church in Springfield, Massachusetts, and they want to give me their basement to rehearse my piece. And we can only fit 20 chairs, but the space is free. I'm taking it. I'm taking it because everywhere else wants to charge me $500 a day or whatever. So I also think it's an issue of accessibility and waiting for the space or waiting for the grant or what have you that may never come. So we really have to create those, as well as our work, we have to create the opportunity for ourselves and others.
Well, piggybacking off that idea, it was funny because when I started the Bridgeport Pride all these years ago, it started off with, with that idea that like, well, I've been doing like Puerto Rico kind of themed work for a little while, not Puerto Rico, but, being like Hispanic art. So things influenced by the Hispanic culture. And it was more like I wanted to do queer art and I wanted to make it specifically queer art and I wanted to make it obvious queer art. And I wasn't really sure where I was going to bring that, maybe just because I was very limited with, who I knew and the places that I actually exhibited at. There was like, really nothing specifically for that. So that's when I, started pitching the idea, like, can we have a gay themed art show or something, and it kind of got shot down a little bit in the beginning. There were concerns and like issues with it. And, with like what Frank said, it was like, if you look around for it and you don't see it, then you make it yourself. It's like, I want to do a show like this because I want to make work like this. And I want it to have a place to be hung at that makes sense that it's here, and sure enough, we got, quite a bit of other artists that wanted to participate within it as well. And then it kind of like took off from there. But definitely if you don't see it, you make it.
Yeah.
Yep.
And when you make it, that's when your tribe just like rises to the top.
Oh, yeah.
Swear to you, man.
Always.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes. So important.
Yes. And every time I do things like that, when I do events and stuff like that, because I plan art events in Connecticut, it always surprises me how many people are out there that are like us, our tribe. Our tribe is so much bigger than we think it is. Yeah. So I think that's why it is so important that, we're doing stuff like this. We're creating the spaces that, we shouldn't have to, we shouldn't have to be putting in all of the emotional labor just to make ourselves feel safe, but we're out here and we're doing it. So, some things that you touched on, Ricky, were actually kind of talking about what I was going to ask next, in that, like, has anyone experienced like censorship with their artwork? You mentioned having some difficulties when you were pitching the idea for having a gay themed art show. Have any of you kind of like run into issues with that in your artwork, where maybe it was, to this or to that?
Well, I'll tell you one of the things that, I think there was a lot of thought, because I pretty much went to City Lights first, with it. And actually, no, I didn't go to City Lights first. I went to the guy who had the Identity show. And I pitched the idea to him because I knew he was a curator and I knew he would know how to, take on a project like this. And I think his biggest concern was my family, and because there was still kind of like, a little rockiness about, my identity, with like my parents and stuff. And he knew my parents very well. And he was just like, are you sure this is what you want to do? Why don't you, then he was trying to like steer me in a direction, like, why don't you just make it a HIV exhibit and have it about that? Or kind of like let's soften this a little bit for the sake of, your parents' comfort. And And I was just like, no, because that's not what I want to do,
Mhm.
you know. So there can surely be, you know, artwork somewhere in the exhibit that has to do with HIV, because, you know, a lot of us either know somebody or are dealing with it or whatever. So if somebody wants to make artwork based on that, you know, obviously they can do it. It was, for me, it was more like, I don't want to just take one component. I want this show to be like everything about it, you
Yeah.
know. I don't want to just take this one little piece and whatever. So I wasn't so concerned about how it was going to be taken from members of my family and stuff like that, because I was just like, I want to make artwork like this, and I want to somehow be the one to push it forward and have it happen. You know, the other concern was, well, it's Bridgeport and everyone, not everybody, but there's a lot of idea like Bridgeport is not very, you know, queer friendly, you know, depending on where you go. And I understand what they're talking about it, but I was just like, well, you know what? This is, you know, my identity, my show, my hometown. I want to put it where it makes sense for me. You know what I mean? So
Mhm.
you're welcome to join me, or you can move it out of the way.
And also, you know
Respectfully.
what? The only way these spaces are going to get friendlier for queer people is if we're out and doing our thing and existing, you know? So
Yes.
good on you. Good on you.
I think that there's a very interesting challenge here, because you know, I was brought up by a family that had a lot of love and music and emotion, and all kinds of folks were in and out of our family homes all the time, and lots of different languages and food. And I had a grandfather that worked for MCA Records, and so there was music everywhere of all kinds, and all kinds of voices and stories being told, and lots of sparkle and lots of clothes and just all of that. What I found interesting was that when I invited my grandparents, who are now departed, to my first auto performance, they couldn't accept it. They couldn't accept that I was telling the story of my childhood as I was then, as I am right now, because they saw me as a little boy that they treated as a little boy. And I do not identify just as a boy anymore. And so retelling that story to strangers about, I don't know, religious festivals and food and family stories and loss and cultural songs and so on, they had real trouble with, because they never knew that I was in there experiencing those things. They got over it, but they had trouble. They had trouble. And to have that conversation with them as an adult, you know, was really hard, and it was also very profound. You know, to ask a question like, well, how do you tell the story of your childhood? Would your mother have appreciated the way you tell that story? Was really something I actually really treasure.
That's beautiful.
That's that bravery you were talking about earlier, man.
It's we all do it, and we all do it in our own ways, you know, or empower others to do it. And it's hard.
Yes. Hard but beautiful. And I think just as people, we just get so instilled with like people pleasing, you know? Oh my goodness. So it just like, just seeps into all the things you do until you unlearn that. Yes. Until you can like really unlearn that.
I don't think I've ever been censored in my workplace so much. I mean, I've definitely been accused of having an agenda, having a queer agenda, having a BIPOC agenda, having a like explicitly anti-oppressive agenda. But
what a terrible agenda to have.
I know. I'm like, oh no, you're not insulting me. Oh, good. It was obvious. Good, because it's the only way we can make other people feel safe. But I have definitely been called on in ways, some of which are appropriate, some of which are not to like speak for, right? To be like the queer eye on something. Oh, that's a show. I didn't mean it that way, but like to be the queer person who's reflecting on whether or not something is appropriate. And I'm like, well, I can tell you what I think is appropriate, but I cannot speak for all queer people.
Yes.
That happens a lot.
So I guess the last question I have for y'all would be, what do you want folks to take from your artwork? Like,
what was the question?
What do you want people to take from your artwork? Like, what do you want your audience to feel? Or is there a message or something that you want people to really, you know, kind of connect with?
Love. Like, honestly, when I create, I want people to feel love, like a hug, you know, like just really seen and just knowing that you have a place no matter what. Yeah.
Definitely.
I think for me, as far as what I want them to take out of it, when I think the way I create now, because I haven't always done it this way, but I know like in the last number of years, I'm creating things that, you know, almost like reveal something about myself. Like it's kind of telling my story, you know, and somebody can interpret it the way they want, or someone can appreciate it or like it or even buy it. But, you know, for me, it's more like I don't make my art with any other, you know, goal than to make something that's meaningful for myself. You know, it means something to me. It has something to do with me. A lot of them, even if I use like models to like, you know, pose for me to like, you know, make a certain image and whatever, it's kind of like I'm using them to tell my story, you know? So a lot of it is kind of like a storybook in a way, you know, all these pictures say something about myself. In fact, there was this one girl who I remember years ago, she said, I have to appreciate anybody who's an artist because, you know, there's something very brave about putting your soul and yourself out there for everyone to see. And that stayed with me all these years later. And I think that kind of almost encouraged me to be even more personal with my artwork than before, because I'm like, you know, this is how I show bravery. You know, I won't, I can't do certain things, but I can paint, you know, and if that's doing something for somebody, then that's like a bonus, because, you know, I do things that just feel right to me, you know, and if somebody benefits from it, if somebody enjoys it, you know, it's like those are all great outcomes that could happen, but that wasn't why I made it. I made it for myself, you know? So that's all I got.
Love it. I love it.
Yeah.
I agree. That, you know, I produce the work for myself, but for me, and as I age, I just find that every morning I draw my eyebrows on, I draw my beard on, and I think about what I'm going to wear, and I think about all of that, because I want to be a walking storyteller about my life. And I also want people to see me, how I choose to put myself out there in the world, but also my work, which I'm excited to do more of this summer, and think, I want to tell my story, whoever they are, because there's some sort of mechanism that I think is in all of us, whether we're queer or not, that a narrative can be presented in a number of ways and can awaken something in somebody else to say, there's a narrative in me that I have to share somehow. And I hearken to Martha Graham again, right? That I don't want my audience to feel anything in particular other than I want to tell my story too. that storytelling was effective enough that it made me think about the value of my own life and how I could tell that, or someone else could tell that.
Definitely.
That's
I think.
so powerful.
What's that?
Oh, just that's powerful. Thank you for sharing that.
It was very beautiful. I think that a couple weekends ago we had our LGBT youth conference, and I did a workshop on watercolor techniques for traditional tattoo artwork. And one of the questions I asked before I started was, how many of you want to be tattoo artists? And like, so many hands went up, you know? And I think the most important thing for that for me was not even necessarily teaching them the art, but just being there and being present and showing them that, you know, I'm a 32-year-old person and I've gone through life and I've got my tattoo license, you know, I'm also a licensed hairdresser, I'm this, I'm that, you know, you can do whatever you want and you can live authentically and unapologetically and visibly, and things can turn out okay. So that's what I want people to take from my work.
Yes, they can. It can turn out okay. Isn't that wonderful?
Yes. It might be a little difficult at times, but it will turn out okay.
Mm.
Did you have anything to add, Hope?
Well, so I'm a Virgo. I'm a very Virgo. So sometimes when I am in the process of producing, I am really hoping that people feel critically challenged. Like they feel like they were really critically thinking about whatever they saw. I gravitate towards those. Like if I didn't work for an institution and I could just produce whatever I wanted to produce, it would probably be a lot of things that are so deeply rooted, as you were saying, Ms. Frank, in like the personal, the truth of that person's reality, that it can evoke it can evoke an audience to wrestle with what they understand to be true. I think I'm always really deeply interrogated in that, in what we believe, and being able to like put ourselves outside of ourselves, being really able to empathize, being really able to like see and hear and understand people. In my own making, I will say I don't always do that though. Sometimes I am, and I think that's the facilitator versus creator in me. So like the facilitator in me is like trying to ensure that there is like a safe, healing, restorative process that also challenges its audience. And then like the creator in me is like definitely just trying to be seen, trying to understand myself better, and trying to reveal something new, probably to myself. I think it's really healthy to think about art as a creator, as healing for yourself.
Absolutely.
So that you don't get too caught in the trap of, as you were saying before with Martha Graham, like what your audience is taking away from it.
Absolutely. Got to kill that ego. Keep it under control.
Yes.
Well, that I think just brings us to the end of our discussion. Does anyone have any final thoughts they want to add before we say goodbye?
I do want to say that Greater Bridgeport Pride is July 23rd, 2022, in downtown Bridgeport.
I'll be there.
So,
very excited.
You'll get to see the new artwork that I'm putting together now.
Nice.
Oh, sweet.
We do not want to miss that for sure.
You do not want to miss that. Unless you're dead. Then you can miss it.
I just want to say how grateful I am for all of you and your perspectives on all of this, because this morning was quite a challenging morning for me. And this was really grounding and helpful in reminding me that I'm not alone in the process of thinking about and doing these things. And of course I'm not, but sometimes you have to be reminded. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
For sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Love you. Thank you for
Right.
your time. Thank you for facilitating this, Finn.
Yes, thank you,
Absolutely.
Kim.
Thanks for sharing the space today. I too feel very rejuvenated from this conversation. So
Yes.
it was really nice to chat with y'all and keep creating.
Thank y'all.
All right. Take care, everyone.
Peace.